This is Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible Study for the 21st century. So friends, here we are. We're just now getting into the real focal point of the book of Luke as it relates to the arrest, the betrayal, the arrest, the trial, if you can call it that, kangaroo trial of Jesus, and his ultimate crucifixion and then resurrection. It really is terrific material written by the historian Luke. So we'll take a little break, and when we're done with the break, I'll be back right after this.
Assure you, from the inside, it is happening. God is our hope. God is all we believe in, this God. And He has called us to be the repairers of wars and to take care of the widow and the orphan in their time of need. And that is exactly what we do. Lives are changing. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. And why? Because Christians have come together as a body. The united body of Christ is coming and saying, it stops with this generation. We break it and we move on.
The kind of religion that God endorses is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, justice, and to keep oneself unpolluted from the world, righteousness.
So last time we just got into the Peter story as it relates to Jesus' last few hours. And there I'm referring to his following at a distance when Jesus was arrested, taken down to the Kidron Valley, and then almost all the way to the top of Mount Zion to Caiaphas' house. And in the context of a courtyard drama, really, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. It's familiar territory. Most of us know the story, even if we're not all that biblically knowledgeable. You probably heard it somewhere, saw it portrayed somewhere. Maybe you went to Sunday school at one point, but it's not an unknown story for sure. But last time we were talking about Peter's shame when it was finally revealed to him what he had done. And we talked last time about his repentance and how it emboldened him on the day of Pentecost, when he preached the church's very first sermon in Acts chapter 2, which we will get to eventually. Great sorrow and mental or spiritual distress, which leads to repentance, has often been the catalyst for great hearts to magnify the Lord. One of Scotland's most famous sons, the much-loved blind poet, preacher, Dr. George Matheson, in a private moment of intense anguish, composed a hymn that was published in the Scottish Hymnal in 1885. And he wrote this, and I quote him, "It was composed with great rapidity. It seemed to me that its construction occupied only a few minutes. I felt myself rather in the position of one who was being dictated to. It was the quickest piece of work I've ever done." And those of you who've been around church for a while, or if maybe you have seen this on YouTube, because there's any number of music groups who have performed this on YouTube. "Oh, Love That Will Not Let Me Go." It'd be worth Googling it or going to YouTube and hearing the beautiful song and the lyrics are profound. In fact, let me quote the lyrics. "O love that will not let me go, I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be. O light that followest all my way, I yield my flickering torch to thee. My heart restores its borrowed ray, that in thy sunshine's blaze its day may brighter, fairer be. O joy that seekest me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain, and feel the promise is not vain, that morn shall tearless be. O cross that liftest up my head, I dare not ask to fly from thee. I lay in dust, life's glory dead, and from the ground there blossoms red, life that shall endless be." Powerful lyrics. But this came out of the depths of great crisis, sorrow, and distress. And as I say, that's often the case, friends. I don't know, C.S. Lewis, who I often quote, he referred on one occasion, I think the book was entitled The Problem of Pain. He talks about suffering as being God's megaphone. I think he's right. If you've had a period of intense suffering, and most of us have in one way or another, whether through illness or through accident or through bereavement, it more than flattens you. It knocks you down into the valley of the shadow of death. You really wonder if you're more alive or dead. And sometimes you wish you were dead. And yet, in the darkness of that near death, there's something deep within your soul that, if you will, germinates and springs to life. And it's an upward look. It's almost like a seed that germinates in the darkness of the soul, and that little green shoot begins to work its way up to the light. Sometimes only suffering can produce that. And I'm not promoting suffering by any stretch. Who of us wants to suffer? But if you're watching this program right now and you're suffering through whatever, you need to know you're not alone. All of us, to a greater or lesser degree, have endured suffering, perhaps are enduring it even as I speak. But the point is that, it too shall pass. That's an old aphorism, but it's true. This too shall pass. This is not the sum total of your existence, this dark valley in which you find yourself right now. So, O cross that liftest up my head, I dare not ask to fly from thee. I lay in dust, life's glory dead, and from the ground there blossoms red, life that shall endless be. We're made for the eternities. Don't forget it. So, let's pick it up here. I'll find verse 66, on my faithful iPad here. Here we go. As soon as it was day, the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, came together and led him into their council, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will by no means believe. And if I also ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. Hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God." Then they all said, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, you rightly say that I am. And they said, "Well, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." Then the whole multitude rose and led him to Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this fellow perverting the nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him and said, "It's as you say." So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." Now, I want to continue right through to verse 25, but let's just stop for a minute. It was still dark as Jesus was arraigned before a hastily convened ad hoc trial by the elders of the people. The rooster had crowed, which meant that the sun was about to peek over the horizon there on the east, coming up over the Mount of Olives. and as I mentioned last time, this was the Sanhedrin. This was the ruling council in Jerusalem, kind of the civil authority, also in many ways the religious authority. And I think there may not have been a quorum either, because it required getting people out of bed, and so some of them may have scrambled in late. But the reason for the rush was they didn't want Jesus to escape, and they wanted to catch him in a blasphemy as soon as they could, because blasphemy would nail it, all right? So their question was double-edged. If you are the Messiah, tell us. And are you then the Son of God? If Jesus answered yes, he'd be accused of insurrection against Rome, Messiah being king of the Jews, and the Romans did not want any king emerging in this subjugated people whom they were occupying. And the ultimate blasphemy, are you then the Son of God? Claiming divinity. So, it was a lose-lose kind of situation for Jesus. So he very wisely refused to answer. He said, you say that I am. But this was enough, apparently, for this kangaroo court. They hauled him off to Pilate, who lived at the Antonia Fortress. Now, again, let me borrow from my knowledge of Jerusalem, having lived there for 7 years and having explored every nook and cranny of the old city. Caiaphas's house was just sort of on the southeastern slope of Mount Zion. It is, because Caiaphas's house still exists. I've been there many times, but it would be maybe 6-7 minute walk to the upper room. It would be a good 20-minute walk down the Kidron Valley and to the other side to the Mount of Olives. But it's there, as I say, in the southeast slope of Mount Zion. Pilate and the Antonia Fortress was on the far northeastern corner inside the city walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And it was where he lived when he was in town. His primary residence was in Caesarea on the Mediterranean Ocean. Beautiful, beautiful spot down there. But when he was in town, the Antonia Fortress is where he stayed. And it was where there was a lot of soldiers living, and a lot of them were operating out of the Antonia Fortress. So it was more of a military stronghold than anything else. But when Pilate was there, it had the authority of Rome. Let's take a break. Now, I say the Antonia Fortress was sort of the symbol of Rome's authority, which it was. It's a very imposing I won't call it a building. It's almost like a mini castle there. But it was where Pilate stayed when he was in the city. And he was a minor official, really. I mean, Rome was massive, and Israel was like a little sandbox to them. I mean, or Palestine, as they called it then. It's just a little sandbox. And it was always full of trouble, always full of tumult. Nobody wanted to go there. And sometimes the official they would send there was sent there as a kind of a punishment. He was called a procurator, all right? So the Roman Procurator, in this case, was Pilate. And the Sanhedrin and these very angry religious officials who finally got Jesus are bringing him to Pilate because they have to do this. They cannot, under the Roman jurisdiction, commit anyone to death because it just wasn't allowed. So the only way that they could dispatch this troublemaker, Jesus, was through Roman authority. And they had to come up with a way of convincing Pilate that Jesus was a threat, all right? And that's why the King of the Jews thing comes up, because if they could convince Pilate, who represents Rome, that there is this insurrectionist who's claiming to be the king of the Jews, that's enough for Rome to squash him. And it would have been more than an excuse to dispatch him. Okay, so in this case, Pilate, the Roman procurator, may have been rubbing the sleep from his eyes. I mean, it's probably 5:36 in the morning. He's grumbling at being roasted from his warm bed, and there's this raucous crowd out there accompanying the Sanhedrin, roaring at their approval. I should say, roaring their approval as the Sanhedrin levels their charges against Jesus. And their accusation, of course, had nothing to do with blasphemy. Rather, they focus on Jesus' threat to the rule of Rome. This was a deliberate, cynical thing that they obviously had planned to do. And by doing that, Jesus represents someone who's destabilizing the nation, forbidding his followers to pay taxes to Rome, which of course was a lie. They forgot that he said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God." Saying that he was claiming kingship in direct defiance of the emperor, that he was teaching insurrection, and they were adamant, urgent even, as the King James Version puts it. They were fierce, okay? So that's all happening. And believe me, I've lived there. I lived there. And I've sometimes, without realizing it, got myself into a few messes, walking into the old city of Jerusalem when there's been some unrest. One time just after a terrorist bombing, another time when there was some act of one of the Israeli parliament members that was seen as inflammatory. I think he put up an Israeli flag over a Palestinian house in the Arab quarter. Anyway, it's like a spark to tinder in that part of the world, and the people just flare. And I've been caught in a few of those, and believe me, it's a pretty scary thing. So that's what's happening here. The people are flaring. They're adamant. They're urging Pilate to have this insurrectionist killed. When the fact of the matter is that their real reason for wanting him killed was not because he was a threat to Rome, but because he was a threat to them. He was definitely a threat to the established religious status quo. He was a threat to their way of doing things. He was too radical by half in terms of his teaching, and they saw him as just not just a bother. They saw him as a potential destroyer of the nation. That's how they saw it. So I'm going to leave that right now, and I'll get back to more of this next program. But right now, I want to do something that I really have wanted to do for a while. As you know, we work with WOW in several places in southern Africa and also in southern India. And I just talked to our partners in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and Chennai, southern India, just a few days ago. And I just wanted to show you something. This picture here is not a river, it's not a stream, it's a street in Chennai, flowing not far from where our champion pastor lives, where he does his work for orphans and widows, and we support him wholeheartedly, not only financially, but also morally and spiritually, and do as much as we can to lift him up. I get there when I can, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID if that day ever comes. But for 3 weeks now, they've had constant monsoon rains. And so this is what they're dealing with. This is rainwater that is flowing down the streets, out of the sewers, and that water is mixed with sewage. So people are walking mid-calf here, and the one umbrella there is because it's raining, even as it's flooding. There's constant stress here because of this horrible situation. When they told me that the water is mixed with sewage, I realized how distressing that must be for them. This shot here is, believe it or not, was a major thoroughfare, and look at it now. And this is southern India. Now, there's other parts of the world, of course, that are experiencing flooding. The northeast coast of the USA and the west coast of Canada have had horrible times over the last few weeks. But, here's the thing. This woman here that you see, and our ministry, I think, were the ones who provided her with that mask. She's what's called a pavement dweller. A pavement dweller. We would call them a street person. How do you dwell on the pavement when the pavement is covered with water? So, you sleep on window ledges, you sleep on doorways, stairways, you sleep in the backs of trucks, on the tops of cars, and you do so, as long as people will let you do it. You slip off, perhaps, fall in the water. Where do you find food? It's just a horror. And I'm not showing this to you because I want to play on your sympathy, but I'm just simply saying that this is the reality for some dearly loved people to whom we minister in the city of Chennai in southern India. And WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, is their major support base, not for the whole city, 9 million people, no way, but for this marvelous ministry that's local church-based, where we are doing our best to help this humble church care for orphans and widows in the largest slum in all of the city. And then, on top of that, trying to help these pavement dwellers in this horrible situation. There's no point in us feeling guilty about what we have. What we should do is feel grateful, right? There's no point in feeling that we're somehow transgressing by not walking around up to our knees in sewage-infested water. Nevertheless, I think it really is a mandate for us as Christians to not only present the gospel, as we're doing with JCT, but also live it out, as we're trying to do with Working for Orphans and Widows. WOW. And when you see those little promos on our program, that's what it's all about. You can log on to wowmission.com, wowmission.com, WOWMISSION, wowmission.com, to get updates on the work that we're doing in various parts of the world. But we really value any support you can provide. I'm not a deep-pocketed guy, neither are you probably, but the point is when we put our hearts together, we can make a big, big difference in the lives of people who have absolutely nothing. We are so blessed here. And consider supporting WOW. And when you support WOW, you're supporting JCT. When you support JCT, you're supporting WOW. JCT is the official voice of WOW. JCT and WOW, both founded by my wife Kathy and I many years ago. And by God's grace, over 21 years now with WOW, we've been trying to minister to what Jesus called the least of these. And that's what WOW is all about. I really appreciate your prayerful support. I'll be back to close the show right after this.
In Africa, Even the most basic medical aid is often non-existent. It is a continent that has been ravaged by disease. Malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, and AIDS are unrelenting. Every man, woman, and child suffers from a lack of adequate health care. Even treatable illnesses like diarrhea and upper respiratory infections can prove deadly. Clinics are too few and often beyond the reach of those in rural areas. WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, is equipping mobile medical clinics with knowledge and tools to reach out to the sick. Trained nurses are treating the ill. Communities are being educated on hygiene and disease prevention. Voluntary counseling and testing for HIV and AIDS is also offered through the clinic. Fear of stigma and discrimination keeps many from being tested for HIV. Nurses address this issue. They work to provide emotional and medical support for those who test positive for the virus. Communities are being transformed through education and medical treatment brought by mobile clinics. Knowledge about disease transmission is changing behaviors and preventing many illnesses. Basic health care prevents needless deaths. Voluntary counseling and testing has also curbed the spread of AIDS.
Many people have learned a lot about HIV/AIDS. Since we are taught, we are trained as community health workers, we have the knowledge, we give it to them, even through role plays and everything, even by talking to them as we go in the villages. So now people are aware what HIV/AIDS is, how it can be prevented, how it can be infected, and all that.
By supporting WOW's Working for Orphans and Widows mobile medical clinics, you can bring hope to countless communities. You can save a life.
So friends, thank you for considering supporting WOW. It really, it means so much. And you know me, I'm not hyper. I'm not out there selling a bill of goods. I'm not, giving you anything for what you give, other than trying to be faithful in exposing the scriptures for your benefit. But this is a very troubled world in which we live. And as believers, we need to be more than verbalizers of the great truth of the gospel, but we also need to be the hands and feet of Jesus wherever we can with those who are in desperate need. And so, with orphans and widows, you're just about as close to desperate need as you can get, whether it's in Africa or India or even in your own city, perhaps in your inner city. There are so many people who are desperately in need, especially during this COVID era. So thank you for that, and thank you for being Jesus' presence in the world. See you next time.